The 1760s were both a beginning and an end. They marked the end of compliant colonists who were proud to be British, as prior to the 1760s, the British colonists never could have imagined a world where they were not part of the British Empire. Being British was part of their identity, gave them a sense of purpose, and provided the feeling of being part of something that mattered.
Hi, I'm a British colonist.
They never could have recognized themselves in the mirror without their British ties. However, the 1760s also symbolized a beginning, the emergence of revolutionary sentiments, and the first steps on the road to revolution. After all, only 13 years after a time of utter loyalty, the colonists were declaring their independence from the nation that had taught them the true meaning of home. The 1760s were the point beyond return for the American Revolution, due to the end of the age of solitary neglect and the beginning of a seemingly tyrannical Britain, which prompted a shift in the colonists' attitudes from loyal subjects to rebellious radicals, and ignited a desire to form their own culture, thus paving the way for the American Revolution. By the 1770s, there was no turning back. The American Revolution was set in motion.
Just so we can be clear, the 7 Years' War and French and Indian War are different. The 7 Years' War took place in Europe and officially lasted from 1756 through 1763, whereas the French and Indian War was the name that the colonists gave to the part of the war taking place in the colonies, because they were fighting the French and the Indians, lasting from 1754 through 1763.
The French and Indian War began in around 1754.
In which the British's expansion into the Ohio River Valley repeatedly resulted in armed conflict with the French, who tried to stop them by building fortified outposts at strategic spots in an effort to protect their fur trade and control over the region.
Not to brag, but I led a local contingent to attack a French outpost and show them who's really in charge.
But you lost.
Minor detail.
Anyways, more skirmishes and battles followed, which ultimately added up and prompted Britain to formally declare war on France in 1756.
Majority of the Native Americans sided with the French, who had traditionally been the nicest to the natives of the three major European powers colonizing the New World.
The English Prime Minister during the war was William Pitt, who was very supportive of the colonists and encouraged them to fight in the war on the British side. In return, he offered them pay and some autonomy, thus igniting the first fire of intercolonial unity.
During the first year of the war, the British suffered a series of defeats, but in 1757, British Prime Minister William Pitt decided to change up the tactics.
We need to start prioritizing this war more. That means we must borrow a significant amount of money in order to fund the fighting we need to win this war.
Initial attempts at negotiating a peace settlement failed, but in March of 1762, French King Louis XV issued a formal call for peace talks, ultimately leading to the Treaty of Paris, which concluded the war. This treaty was ratified in 1763, despite difficulties to get the public and Parliament on board.
We, Britain, are granted Canada and the majority of French and Spanish territory that lies east of the Mississippi Valley.
I'm French diplomat Etienne Francois de Stainville, Duc de Choiseul, and sadly, we are not quite as lucky. We have to give Louisiana to Spain, and all that the treaty has left us are 2 sugar islands. We were able to negotiate to keep these islands because they bring in a significant amount of trade and money.
Hemos mantenido parte del territorio al oeste del Mississippi, pero hemos intercambiado el este y el oeste de Florida por Cuba.
Although the British were regarded as the most powerful country following the treaty, one of the major results of the 7 Years' War was that the British racked up a huge amount of debt.
The colonists should obviously help them pay off this debt because the colonists were beneficiaries to the war. Also, the colonists don't pay direct taxes, only tariffs, whereas us British citizens pay taxes. Yet both the colonists and British citizens benefited from British rule through protection and trade opportunities.
Actually, Bud, we have paid our share enough by fighting for your country in the French and Indian War, raising all those colonial armies and laying our lives out for you guys.
He's obviously confused.
Fight me.
After the French and Indian War, the colonists began referring to themselves as Americans. Since the British had racked up such a huge debt from the 7 Years' War, the British raised the prices of goods sold to the natives and stopped paying rent on western forts. As a result, many Native American tribes were not happy, including the Ottawa.
We cannot stand by and let them take what is ours. Tribes of the Ohio Valley, join me in an attack on our colonial outposts.
Pontiac's rebellion ultimately led to the British passing of the Proclamation of 1763, which prohibited colonists from settling anywhere west of the Appalachian Mountains. This area was preserved for the American Indian reservations.
This was passed enough to neutralize conflict between the white settlers and natives, but it was too late. The colonists had already begun settling west of the designated line. In addition, the British wanted to avoid any expensive wars with the natives, as they were already in major debt from the 7 Years' War.
However, the treaty did manage to anger the colonists, who viewed this as the British encroaching on their freedom and rights, which they regarded as tyrannical and unfair. The Proclamation of 1763 marked the end of the Age of Solitary Neglect.
Do you wish you could live in the 1760s, experience what it would be like to live under British rule as an American colonist, and witness the revolutionary sentiments building within American colonial society?
What?
Well, boy, do we have a treat for those of you who said yes. Introducing Tyranny, the 1760s version of Siri, which is rich in tyranny. Tyranny recognizes the same trade restrictions and acts that the British colonists experienced in the New World.
Thierry, order me 4 pounds of sugar. We're baking cookies tonight.
That will be $200 because of the Sugar Act.
What? That much?
Just like British Parliament was very respectful of the colonists' desires and requests, Tyranny also listens and will do anything you ask without question. Tyranny, sing me a song.
No.
Since British Parliament always heard the colonists clearly and addressed their needs regularly, Tyranny also accomplishes this feat.
Thierry, what was the score of the last Patriots game?
Calling Mom.
Come get your very own Tyranny at your local Walmart or Amazon. Shipping is free if you pay $8.99, and if you buy one within the next 62.3 hours, we will throw in a free 5x5 picture of the British flag. So come get your local Tyranny today for only 23.78 cents, plus an additional $300 tax. Warning, Tyranny can cause headaches, stomach explosions, creamy skin texture, non-stop blinking, murderous impulses, seizures, death, and catastrophic shivering at random times. If any of these symptoms occur, send a representative to Britain and you get nothing changed.
Also in response to the huge amounts of debt incurred from the French and Indian War, Parliament passed the Sugar Act on April 5, 1764, in order to raise money from the colonists through import taxes. Smuggling was generally accepted at the time, and part of the social norm to combat British tariffs. So in an effort to reduce smuggling, the Sugar Act effectively lowered the import tax on foreign molasses.
This was the first act that Parliament strictly enforced. Prior to the Sugar Act, no duties or taxes were really collected or enforced. However, violators of the Sugar Act were arrested and tried in Vice Admiralty courts. Vice Admiralty courts were courts in which a single judge issued a verdict without deliberation of a jury. So basically, the judges were held in Britain's pocket and sided with the British, leaving the colonists' fates to dwindle.
The colonists had not really resisted Parliament's other taxation methods or acts before this one, because the other acts aligned with mercantilism, which the colonists understood because they used to be British. However, they were enraged with Britain's interference in colonial affairs.
In response to the Sugar Act, there was some boycotting of British goods, but not nearly to the degree to which we see for the Stamp Act.
Prior to the Currency Act of 1764, the colonies suffered a constant shortage of currency for trading, as there were not really any gold or silver mines at their disposal, and currency could only be obtained through trading as regulated by Great Britain. The colonists felt that the only option was to print their own paper money in the form of bills of credit. However, Parliament passed the Currency Act in 1764, which banned the colonies from printing any new bills or colonial paper money, and ordered the reissue of existing currency, thus restricting trade and leading to further resentment. not only because this act threatened to disable the colonial economy and resulted in a trade deficit with Great Britain, but because it represented further incursion of British control into American freedom and affairs. The Currency Act also affected the system of paying off debts.
What do you mean you can't accept this?
According to the new Currency Act, it is illegal to pay public and private debts with colonial paper money, so you have to use Parliament's hard currency system, which is based on the pound sterling instead.
The Currency Act also established what was essentially a superior form of Vice Admiralty courts, in which those suspected of smuggling or other violations of the customs law would receive a hearing in favor of British rather than colonial interests. The Stamp Act was passed in 1765, which was the first tax to affect all the colonies equally and to really affect colonists of all classes. It was also the first internal tax to ever be imposed on the colonies by Parliament. So naturally, the colonists were furious.
In order to be enacted on November 1st, 1765, the Stamp Act required all colonists to purchase watermarked tax paper for newspaper and legal documents. How rude! This tax was a tax on all materials, so it was a broad-based tax that covered all legal documents, licenses, and even playing cards. Parliament established this tax in effort to cope with the expense of keeping troops in the colonies, to enforce taxes and maintain order.
This was the first tax specifically aimed at raising revenue. In addition, this tax specifically taxed goods made in the colonies.
Parliament thinks they can tax whatever they want, whenever they want, even though the tax is really small.
They can't just do that, can they? What happened to our rights of self-taxation? And you know who this new Stamp Act affects the most?
Who?
Us lawyers.
The fact that the most affected group was lawyers was extremely dangerous for Britain, because this was a literate and very persuasive group, which means the protests were large and powerful. This act really confirmed the colonists' suspicions that more taxes were to follow, that their days of semi-autonomy were over, as their rights of self-taxations were slowly chipped away.
With this act, all legal documents required a stamp, and if there was no stamp, the holder of the stampless legal document could be arrested. This act led to the pamphlet written by James Otis, The Rights of the British Colonies Asserted and Proved, which laid out the colonists' arguments against taxes, and it was extremely popular.
We don't need secession. We need a greater degree of autonomy in the colonies. No taxation without representation.
No taxation without representation.
The British had a bit of a different take on representation.
The colonies are already represented in Parliament through virtual representation, which is the principle in which all members of Parliament represented all British subjects, regardless of who elected them. So all this no taxation without representation stuff is absolutely bollocks.
In Virginia, Patrick Henry, a new member of the House of Burgesses, drafted the Stamp Act Resolves in May of 1765, which protested the tax and stated that only the Colonial Assembly had the right to tax the colonists. The Virginia legislature only adopted 4 out of the 6 resolves, leaving the 2 most radical ones out. Patrick Henry delivered a historic speech against the Stamp Act.
The British have gone too far this time. They refuse to accept that only the Colonial Assembly has the right to tax the colonists, and in doing so, they have made a formidable foe, the American colonists.
This is treason!
If this be treason, make the most of it.
The different classes within the colonies responded and protested differently to the Stamp Act. The lower classes acted as mobs, personifying the mob mentality, and protested using physical force. They burned effigies of the stampman and tax collectors, engaged in tar and feathering, burned tax collectors' houses, and physically harmed the tax collectors. The mobbing was very effective because by the time the Stamp Act was supposed to take effect, there was no one willing to collect taxes.
I'm here with Stamp Act expert Daryl. So Daryl, tell me about the middling sorts. Who were they in society?
While the middling sorts were middle classes, were mainly the merchants and business people.
Oh, and how did they respond to the Stamp Act?
The middling sorts formed protest groups throughout the colonies known as the Sons of Liberty, which had a secret nature so there weren't many records of members, who were mainly Freemasons and encouraged non-importation and non-consumption agreements in addition to boycotting.
Wow, I see you. Well, that's all the time we have for today, folks. See you next time on You Thought You Knew the 1760s, but did you know?
The
elites responded to the Stamp Act by forming the Stamp Act Congress in an effort to protest the act. The Stamp Act Congress is also where the Virginia Stamp Act resolves came about. This is one of the first successful instances of the colonies coming together and working in unison towards a common goal.
The Stamp Act Congress drafted petitions and wrote letters to Parliament, urging them to repeal the Stamp Act. As part of the Stamp Act Congress in October of 1765, representatives from 9 of the 13 colonies attended and declared,
The Stamp Act is unconstitutional because it is a tax levied without the colonists' consent. All agreements say aye.
Aye.
The majority of the delegates believed Britain did not have the right to determine colonial taxes and were also against the Vice Admiralty Courts. The Stamp Act Congress also approved John Dickinson's 17-point Declaration of Rights and Grievances. Ultimately, the elite's form of protest was not nearly as effective in comparison to the middling sorts and mobbing lower class. However, nonetheless, in 1766, the Stamp Act was repealed. This was bad for the British because it taught the colonists that they could get whatever they wanted through enough protesting and complaining. Britain also decided to enact a change in government, using Prime Minister Grenville as a scapegoat for the Stamp Act and replacing him with Lord Rockingham, who was also against the Stamp Act. However, Lord Rockingham linked the repeal of the Stamp Act to a passage in the Declaratory Act, which was passed immediately following the repeal.
I'm Gordon Ramsay, and this is Colonial Hell's Kitchen. The theme of today's competition will be the 1760s, which is obviously the best theme because I chose it. We have 3 chefs competing today, who are ready to bring the heat.
Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm really excited to be competing against all these amazing chefs. Today, I brought my cow spoon. That was my great-grandmother's, and I'd really like to thank my family.
Okay, time's up.
Oh, I just think, can I have one
No,
more?
You're
Okay.
next.
I'm Patricia, and I came here to dominate. If I have to obliterate others, I will. Aprons are for the weak.
I'm Herbert. I'm here for the free food, so
Today, the 3 of you will be competing to make the best scones for a British tea party, but with one twist. You can't use anything taxed in the 1760s, which means no sugar because of the Sugar Act. The winner will get to be the head chef at a new kitchen in Las Vegas. You will have 42 minutes and 52.7 seconds. Time started 5 minutes ago. Go! And now, the results you all have been waiting for. Patricia
Thank you.
was
Thank you very much.
disqualified because sugar was in fact taxed in the 1760s. Herbert's meal was not edible. You should get a new hobby. And Lily won because hers was obviously the most amazing thing to ever grace this earth. So that's just fact, and y'all need to accept that. Period. Done. Okay, see you next time on Colonial Hell's Kitchen.
On March 18, 1766, with the end of the Stamp Act came the beginning of the Declaratory Act, which declared that the British government had the right to tax and legislate in all cases anywhere in the colonies, thus making British Parliament sovereign over all American colonies.
You would think that in this day and age, Parliament would realize the strenuous lifestyle in which we have to live due to these acts.
hello, sir. How may I help?
I am a British soldier. I will be staying with you until the king notifies me otherwise.
Now,
The popular belief that redcoats tossed colonists from their bedchambers in order to move themselves did not always happen because the Third Amendment prevents soldiers from being housed in citizens' homes. The uncomfortable circumstances of housing soldiers represented another tyrannical act of the British, thus leading to more discomfort within the colonies and ultimately leading to the Boston Massacre in 1770.
For the second time in history, colonists are levied solely for the purpose of increasing revenue. The Townshend Acts placed duties on goods coming from Britain into the colonies, such as lead, tea, glass, paper, and paint.
Hello, sir. Are you looking to buy this bundle of paper for 0.39 pounds?
Why is that paper so expensive? Are the British trying to take control of our entire lives?
It seems so. My business is struggling.
These Townshend Acts of 1767 also created more Vice Admiralty courts and several new government offices to be used to enforce the Crown's will in the colonies. In addition, the Act suspended the New York legislature because it refused to comply with the law that required colonists to supply British troops. The Acts also instituted writs of assistance, which were licenses given to the British that gave the British power to search any place they suspected of containing smuggled goods.
Colonists were extremely unhappy with the Townshend Acts due to the fact that the British were assuming control over more aspects of their lives, and accused colonists were sent to Vice Admiralty courts, where they were tried unfairly with only a judge and no jury. Although colonists were able to unite over this issue, especially thanks to one particular set of letters.
What is that book about?
It is revolutionary. You must read it. It addresses the cruel acts of the British and how these acts are all an attempt to raise British revenue.
That sounds enlightening, but I'm not sure I'd be able to comprehend it.
No, John Dickinson wrote it from the perspective of a farmer in plain-spoken English, so it's easy to understand and relatable.
Although the Townshend Acts deeply upset the colonists, they led to unification throughout the colonies and sparked goals of revolution.
Unity was extremely apparent throughout the colonies once the Massachusetts Circular Letter was written by Samuel Adams in 1768 in response to the Townshend Acts.
Although we wish to buy these goods, we simply cannot. As colonists defy the odds of imperial British thought.
One of the most successful modes of resistance was boycotting British goods, because it had a direct, determinable effect on British economy.
Knitting, 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 knitting our time away, working towards unity, so we can have a say.
The women's role was crucial to the colonists' success. They replaced British imports with New England goods so that colonists could still withstand boycotts.
Despite the naive colonial newspapers discussing methods of finding a compromise between Britain, the paternal mother country, and the colonies, the insolent children, there was no hope of reconciliation.
It was too late to rewind the clock and fix the shattered relationship because there was no trust between Britain and the colonies anymore.
Although only a few radicals were discussing independence from Britain at the time, none of the colonists were ready to bow down to Britain.
In the colonists' eyes, whether they admitted it or not, too many rights had been violated and unjust actions performed for them to merely forget and move on.
In addition, the colonists had learned during the 1760s that they had power, that they mattered, and that they had a voice. This concept of colonists having power over Britain really surfaced when they forced Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act. During the 1760s, an American culture began to form, along with the introduction of an American identity. As the colonists began to identify less and less with the British and more with the place they called home. Ultimately, by the end of the 1760s, the colonists had reached the point beyond return and were stuck on a road headed for a revolution that would either secure their rights and freedoms or send them crashing to their knees.
Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house.
We need a greater degree of autonomy in the colonies. No taxation. Oh, Jesus.
Autonomy?
Autonomy? What?
You look like a Girl Scout.
Pop it, lock it, polka dot it, country filing, hip hop it, hop and side, move side to side, jump to the left,
So, it's teapot.
Teapot. Because you don't pour out a cup.
But it's a I'm a little teacup.
Little teapot. Because your spout, your cup doesn't have a spout.
You're the one doing the pouring. Because you're like spilled to me. No, but when you pour it out, you're pouring it into the mouth, right?
No, you're pouring into the...
Vincent, you're not giving me your best.